Hello, I'm Judy Arter of the Assessment Training Institute in Portland, Oregon. In the presentation you're about to watch, Rick Stiggins helps us think about how to expand the contribution assessment makes to school improvement. With assessment, as with so many other educational practices, beliefs can limit our ability to help our students succeed. Rick points out some common beliefs that may sound familiar to you. Then he describes why these beliefs about assessment have been counterproductive. That is, why they have kept us from achieving the fairness, equity, and high levels of student achievement we all strive for in standard-driven schools. If these beliefs have kept assessment from reaching its potential in school improvement, what more productive beliefs might replace them? If beliefs drive practice, as we think they do, this is a critical question, and some answers are provided as the presentation unfolds. As the mistaken beliefs are examined, consider your own organization. To what extent are the beliefs present in your own context? Have they acted as an impediment to student achievement in your schools? About halfway through this 50-minute presentation, we'll pause and give you time to consider your beliefs in greater depth. Then, after the break, Rick will offer his vision of excellence in assessment.
As we go along here, what I want you to do is to unlock from the traditions that we have thought about assessment for throughout our careers, both as students and as teachers. And I want us to be guided by the French novelist Marcel Proust, who instructs us that a voyage of discovery consists not of seeking new landscapes, but of seeing through new eyes. What I'm going to advocate this morning is that as a society and a school culture, we try very, very hard to begin to see assessment through new eyes. And the points that I'm going to make are basically these. If we can combine accurate assessments with effective use, the results will be astounding. Now let's begin the presentation by acknowledging the 3,000-pound elephant sitting in the middle of the room. What does it mean to leave no child behind? We all know that this is a high priority in our assessment world. We all know that it represents a manifestation of a belief in standards-based education. What I want us to begin with here is a deep understanding of what a profound change in the mission of the social institution called school this kind of thinking represents. Now, this isn't new thinking, this idea of standards-based education and all students meeting standards. If y'all been around for a while, and I see a few gray hairs and beards in the room, you will acknowledge that this idea of standards-based education has been coming for about 40 years in the United States in various incarnations.
See, most of us grew up in schools that had the effect of leaving lots of students behind. The amount of time available to learn was fixed, 1 year per grade level. The amount learned at the end of that period of time was free to vary across students. Some learned a lot, some didn't learn very much at all. The effect of that over an extended period of time was to spread us along a continuum of achievement. At the end of high school, we captured that in a high school grade point average and therefore our rank in class. See, my point is that in that system there were winners and there were losers. The winners were the students who finished high in the rank order. They were confident learners, optimistic. They had a strong desire to continue to win and effort to go with it. But the thing is, we need to understand that the losers in that system lived a fundamentally different reality. For them, continuous failure caused their confidence to be shaken, and pessimism and futility took over. These students often gave up in hopelessness. Some of them left school. The point is, school was accountable for providing the opportunity to learn. If students didn't take advantage of the opportunity, that was regarded as the student's problem, not the school's problem. Now, what has happened, however, is that over time, society has begun to realize that if all schools do is to produce a dependable rank order by the end of high school, the bottom third to bottom half of that rank order distribution fail to develop foundational reading, writing, and math problem-solving proficiencies required to compete in, let alone survive in, an increasingly complex and technical society. And so what society is saying is that they want us to take that broad spread of achievement and raise the floor to a certain level of competence. And they want all students to attain those levels. We call them our academic achievement standards, and they're universal across the country. We need for all students to meet those foundational standards. We used to call this mastery learning. We've in the past called it the behavioral objectives movement, or the minimum competencies movement, or outcomes-based education. Today we call them standards-driven schools. Our point is that if we have some students who have not yet met those standards, unlike the old days, we can't have them giving up in hopelessness. Failure, losers, giving up are no longer options. We need all students to believe that the target is within reach if they keep trying, so they'll keep trying. We need for all students to succeed. That's what it means to leave no child behind.
What I want us all to understand is that this concept of behavioral objectives, minimum competencies, outcomes, and standards manifests a different vision of what a good school will be. A profound change in the mission of schools. From those that merely produce a dependable rank order by the end of high school, to those that ensure maximum competence of all students. All students will become competent readers, competent writers, competent math problem solvers. Notice that that vision does not say we'll produce merely a dependable rank order of students in terms of their writing proficiency. It's a different way of thinking about the mission of the social institution. Well, here's the problem from an assessment point of view. The assessment, evaluation, and grading procedures that we all grew up with were born and bred for the purpose of producing dependable rank order. They were born and bred to help some students succeed, but that's not the mission of a no child left behind kind of thinking. It is to help all students succeed. And that brings with it a profound change. Assessment's historic role has been to provide test scores for public accountability in the service of helping using the assessment process to drive change. What I'm going to advocate this morning is that we use the assessment process in a fundamentally different way to encourage change. And you'll see what I mean by that as we go. But let me just reveal for you in a brief history how this idea of using assessment to drive change, that verb is critical, to drive change, has played out in the United States over the last 60 years. It began back in the 1950s, 30s, 40s, and 50s with our first college admissions testing programs, which didn't remain college admissions testing programs. What began to happen almost from the outset is we began computing average SAT scores state by state, ranking states on the basis of average SAT scores, and reporting the results to the newspaper. Now, why would a society do that? Because it's based on the belief that those people who finish low in the rank order will be sufficiently embarrassed by their place in the rank order to work harder, produce better schools, and their schools will be more effective. It's the use of test scores to drive change in an accountability sense.
What's most paradoxical is to understand that as this was going on, no one had any idea what the test tested and didn't test. No one had any idea how what was tested related to their local curriculum. There were very few people who had any idea what the scores meant or didn't mean. The mere fact that we were testing in this way was supposed to change something. And this wasn't just true of college admissions tests. As norm reference standardized tests took over, the same problems continued to evolve. As a result, during this time of heavy testing, no one knew what to change or how to change it. Yet somehow this was supposed to improve schools?
Now watch how that has played out. It continued in the 1960s with the birth of the accountability movement that we all know and love today, as for the first time people began to question the efficacy of the American educational system. And people began to turn to test scores to defend their programs. And what they turned to were scores on norm reference standardized achievement tests in district-wide accountability-oriented testing programs. Administer the same standardized test to all students, all schools within the district, compute average scores by district, and report the results to the newspaper. Now, why would a community do that? Because that kind of public accountability would drive change, compel people to get better. In the 1970s, we added statewide testing programs. We began the decade with 3, ended the decade with 37. That number is now virtually every state. Administer the same standardized test to every school district within a state, compute average scores, and report the results to the media. Now, why would a state do that? It's the same kind of thinking over and over and over again. In the 1980s, we added a national assessment program. In the 80s and 90s, international assessment programs. Administer the same test to all students in several nations, compute average scores, and report the results to the media. Now, why would a world do that? Layer upon layer upon layer. And once a layer was in place, it was never eliminated. And then to top it all off, we passed the No Child Left Behind law, putting in place for the first time in the history of American education a national every pupil examination system.
Over time, these large-scale testing practices began to feed aggressively on themselves. Testing begat more testing, begat more testing. Over the various levels and over the decades, we have to have spent billions in the service of producing dependable results at all these levels. See, the problem is there's no way the benefits of this testing have matched the costs of conducting them. As a matter of fact, some contend that there have been no benefits, and others contend that there's been significant damage done. The point is, after billions of dollars in 60 years, at best we have uncertain results. I just wonder what would have happened over the decades if we had been able to balance the effective use of good quality classroom assessment with our standardized testing. I wonder what would have happened if we had built an environment conducive to the effective use of assessment to support student learning. I wonder what would have resulted if we had been able to help those students who weren't doing well and not just label them. See, my point is we know how to do that. It's just that we've really not implemented those instructionally helpful assessment procedures in the past.
Now, my point here is not to use that as a basis from which to say, let's stop testing. If they're good quality assessments, used in the right way, they can help. And I'll show you in a few minutes how we weave that into our thinking at the Assessment Training Institute about what role they might play. But I want to address a different question, a different topic, and that is, how is it that we could come through 60 years of layer upon layer of this kind of thinking and have it not have impacted? What is it about that progression that has kept it from having a profoundly positive impact? And I think I have a set of answers to that question, and that's why I'm here this morning, and this is what I wanted to share with you. I think that entire progression has been based on a mistaken set of beliefs about what role assessment can play or how to use it in the service of school improvement. A set of mistaken beliefs that are societal, not just school culture beliefs. As a matter of fact, I guess I'm going to contend that we in the school community have been somewhat victimized by these mistaken beliefs, and I want to share some of them with you. One mistaken belief that this progression is based on is the belief that high-stakes tests are good for all students because they motivate students to learn. Ladies and gentlemen, that belief is fundamentally wrong. High-stakes tests are not good for all students. They're good only for those students who expect to succeed on them. For all other students, they are yet another source of embarrassment frustration, and hopelessness that continues to drive them from the learning place.
In this case, we need to return to an idea that I mentioned earlier about winners and losers. If we raise the bar to world-class standards and map those on high-stakes tests, then those students whose personal academic history has been one of success, the confident, optimistic students, are going to try harder and they'll learn more as a result of this, and the system works the way it was supposed to. But what we also have to realize is that those students who have not experienced academic success in the past are going to live a different reality. For them, if we raise the bar to world-class standards on high-stakes tests, they're going to feel that the chances of their success in school are going down, not up. We're raising the bar to even higher levels than those they've been failing at for years. And in their case, hopelessness and futility can take over and they can stop trying. My point here is that the emotional dynamics of the high-stakes test are different for these different students, and we need to acknowledge those differences. We carry a set of parallel beliefs around. I often hear reference to them as I work in schools. For example, we often operate on the parallel belief that if I judge you to have failed or threaten to do that, it will cause you to try harder. See, that's only true if the student feels in control of the contingencies that allow them to avoid failure in the future. If they feel as though they're not in control of those, then the effect of this belief is negligible. Another parallel belief that I see operational a lot is the belief that if a little intimidation doesn't work, try a lot of intimidation. Well, the bright, high-achieving student faced with intimidation will respond productively to deal with it. But students who are on losing streaks will respond differently. My point is that the use of intimidation to cause kids to want to learn when they don't believe they can is a dead-end enterprise. It can't work because that path leads through hopelessness long before it ever gets to competence. Another parallel belief that we all grew up with is our teachers often believe that the way you maximize learning is to maximize anxiety. What we need to understand is that our teachers were wrong about that. We now know, based on 2 decades of research on the functioning of the human brain during cognition, that when it's racked with anxiety, the human brain locks itself down in self-defense, making learning impossible. The emotional dynamics of that kind of thinking are wrong. What we need to do is we need to institute procedures that have all students believing that the target is within reach, so that they'll keep trying, because unless they're willing to keep trying, learning will remain beyond reach for them.
Remember what I said at the beginning. High-stakes tests are good only for those students who expect to succeed on them. Now, let's not be naive here. There's no way in which people are going to stop the freight train associated with high-stakes testing. It's going to continue for the foreseeable future. So the remedy that I'm going to suggest then is that if we can't or won't stop the high-stakes testing, the high-pressure testing, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we set more students up to expect to succeed on them? And we have a solid assessment-based answer to that question. And I'll share it with you as we go. We know the answer to that question. We know how to use the assessment process to set a very high proportion of our students up for success, but historically we've not invested in it because we've been obsessed with the belief that the path to school improvement is paved with a better standardized test if we could just find the right one. I'll come back to that in just a second. Before I do, let me share with you another mistaken belief. This entire progression is based on the belief that it's the adults in the system whose instructional decisions contribute the most to student learning and school success. I'm saying to you, ladies and gentlemen, that beyond a shadow of a doubt, the belief is wrong. It's not that as adults we don't make incredibly important instructional decisions. We do. As teachers and principals and superintendents and as parents, we make critically important decisions that contribute to the effectiveness of schools. I am honoring that contribution. But it turns out that there are some other instructional decision makers present in school whose instructional decisions contribute even more to the effectiveness of learning than do yours. Who might those other instructional decision makers be? See, we never think of students as assessment users. I guess most often we think of them as the victims of the assessment. But they are incredibly important instructional decision makers. What are some of the decisions that kids make based on evidence of their achievement that they get from us, not just once a year, but every 3 to 4 minutes in the classroom, that might influence the quality of their learning? They're deciding whether I'm capable of learning this stuff or just too stupid. They're deciding whether the learning is worth the effort that it's going to take to get it. Do you understand that depending on how they come down on those kinds of decisions, we may or may not ever enter into influencing their learning lives? If they come down on the wrong side of those issues, we become incapable of helping them. My point is that students represent critically important instructional decision makers whose instructional decisions, whose uses of assessment we have acknowledged nowhere in our assessment legacy. But we know how to do that. See, we know how to build assessment environments that honor the information needs of all assessment users and not just the big ones. But let me continue with this set of mistaken beliefs. As I look at this progression, what I see is a manifest belief that the most important instructional decisions are the ones that are made once a year. Now, let me backpedal quickly and say I know nobody believes that it's only once a year decisions that influence the quality of learning. I acknowledge that. But look, ladies and gentlemen, this is where we have spent our money. Assessments that happen once a year. I submit to you, therefore, prima facie evidence of a nation that believes that if you invest your money here, you get the most results. If we had believed that other instructional decision frequencies were important, that other assessments that happen more frequently are important, we would have invested in them, but we didn't. Billions of dollars over 60 years in the service of this agenda. I'm saying to you, this is wrong. How many of y'all are teachers? Raise your hands. How often do you make decisions about how to interact with your kids? Are you doing that about once a year, are you? How about every 3 to 4 minutes? Is it any wonder, therefore, that a once-a-year assessment is not likely to exert much influence on what happens in the classroom day to day? And kids are making those decisions that they make also every 3 to 4 minutes, not once a year. Heck, they don't even know what those scores once a year mean.
Recently, schools have begun to realize that more frequent assessment would be helpful, and so we're seeing people turning to short cycle assessments or common assessments or benchmark tests, testing student mastery of standards more frequently along the way so as to identify standards that are not being met by large numbers of students or individual students who are having difficulty. And identifying those power standards and need for kids is a really good idea. It's helpful, and we should continue to do that as far as it goes. But my point here is that more frequent summative assessment is not formative assessment. Identifying the problem doesn't fix it. Besides, what if those more frequent assessments are of poor quality, are focused at the wrong level of specificity? What if the results are misunderstood by the users or miscommunicated? When those problems come up, no matter how frequent the assessment, it's wasted and can be harmful. See, the thing is, it's not just about testing, no matter how frequently it happens. It's about how we use the assessment process and its results to help kids.
The remedy that I want to suggest in this case is that we build our assessment systems in a way that both honor those critically important instructional decisions that are made once a year, and they are legion, and also honor the instructional decision makers who use assessment every 3 to 4 minutes. We know how to build those systems. One more mistaken belief. As I look at this progression and as I think about what's been evolving in the United States over the last 60 years, What I see beyond a shadow of a doubt is a system built on the belief that teachers and administrators don't need to understand the principles of sound assessment. What happened was that 60 years ago, we separated assessment from instruction. We said, teachers, you teach, and you don't need to know anything about assessment. Measurement people, you test, and you don't need to know anything about teaching. The counter-belief has to be that everyone involved in the system absolutely must understand the difference between sound and unsound assessment practices, because those practices are going to need to come into play continuously in supporting and encouraging the learning of kids.
See, this becomes more and more critical the more standards-driven schools become. It's not possible to help kids make continuous progress toward higher standards unless both those students and their teachers have continuous access to dependable, to high-quality evidence of student learning along the way, coming from high-quality classroom assessments. Besides, as I look back, I wonder what would have happened over the last 60 years of standardized testing if we had provided school leaders with the assessment understandings they need to know how to use those assessment results productively. I'm quite certain if we had provided them with that ability, we would be able to show a much stronger relationship between having conducted standardized tests and student learning than we're able to show today.
We have been living an assessment legacy in which we as educators are forced to see assessment most often as a compliance issue. We administer the statewide test because we have to. We report our results on the No Child Left Behind testing because we have to. This is the use of assessment in a compliance mode, not in a pedagogical mode. In addition, it's a legacy over the last 60 years that fundamentally disregards the information needs of some of the most critically important instructional decision makers. It's a legacy in which we use assessment in ways that destroy the motivation of as many students as they help. It's an assessment legacy characterized by failing to provide the practitioners who conduct schools with the assessment tools and understanding required to fulfill their assessment responsibilities. This is our legacy of the last 60 years, and we wonder why we can show no demonstrable impact. I think that the entire progression was doomed to impotence from its outset because it has been being conducted in an environment incapable of using it to any advantage.
At this point in the presentation, you've heard several beliefs about assessment that prevent it from having its maximum impact on student learning. We'd like you to pause the presentation for a few minutes to consider two questions about your own local assessment system, be it a school district or some other organization. First, what assessment beliefs in your system do you think are most in need of change? And second, if those beliefs changed, what changes in practice would follow? After discussing these issues, please return to Rick's presentation where he'll describe an alternative vision of assessment, one which promises to have a major positive impact on student achievement. Then, he'll spell out certain conditions that need to be in place to realize this impact. As Rick proceeds, think about the extent to which the conditions are in place in your schools.